The show is called Rubicon. The paintings refer to this river, but actually more to the idea of the Rubicon, the idea of crossing the Rubicon, of these events in human lives and in society where things change and cannot be undone, and particularly with their relationship to how they impact our relationship to the natural world. So when I was doing these paintings, it was always continuously focusing on the idea of our relationship to the rest of nature, which is always the focal point of my work. And so everything in these scenes is from my imagination, and this is particularly important with the Rubicon as a concept and as a river that exists, because it's about the Rubicon, the idea of these Pandora's box moments. And so I made a point of never actually knowing what the river, the Rubicon, which does exist, looks like. I've never seen it. I've never looked at a photo of it. I started simply just with the idea of a river, because each series will always relate to something in landscape, some element in landscape that humans are inextricably linked to and tied to. And you know, throughout history, rivers have always been gods. They've always been points that have connected us, that have divided us, points of salvation, points of destruction. And they run, pardon the pun, quite literally through, you know, all different aspects of human life. And so it was really focusing on that to start with, and then focusing on the idea of the bridge, the idea to sort of annul the river almost and render it irrelevant through the building of a bridge. And that's what I focused on to start with. And for some reason, every painting became an upland mountain stream. I think it's probably focusing back on my interest in the sublime. So I just start by drawing out the building, and then I allow everything else just to flow around it. Nothing is justified using pencil that much beforehand. I mean, you can see sort of here, there's the odd pencil mark on the building, but then the rest, you'll probably have the horizon line, and then everything else is kind of fleshed out in paint so that you can change things and alter things how I see fit, and I'm not bound to a preconceived idea of the painting. I also like the sort of the weave and the texture, what's known as the grain of the canvas, to essentially be evident in the primed layer of paint underneath the painting, because as my work has become slightly more gestural, and particularly in this series of work, there are areas of looseness that perhaps weren't as evident in previous paintings, as particularly in the stone. It's almost this strange contradiction that the stone is almost painted in a more loose manner than the water, and then it's just held together by these few points of light highlighting, or the moss just like adding structure and integrity to it. When I'm painting with this reference to, you know, painters like Claude Lorraine or like, you know, the American Hudson River School painters, there is this tendency for people to assume that I'm painting in a manner that's very rigid to their processes as well, and wedded to those processes, whereas actually the whole point of the paintings is that I'm taking that idea and that sort of worldview and I'm sort of twisting it slightly to my own interpretation. And so that's why I always have these buildings as sort of stand-ins, as echoes for systems of power, be they that of religion or of sort of mercantile power or state power and things like that. But at the same time as referencing these systems of power, I never actually put any iconography of the systems of power. So, for example, in that one there where you have the sort of basilica-like building, there's no crosses. I remember once I did a painting and I thought about leaving a cross in, and then I remember I painted it and I took it out because I realised the moment you do that, you're painting about something completely different. You're being too direct with the work. So in this series of paintings of Rubicon, although I'm painting about the sense of successive changes and successive, you know, advances and movements away from nature that ironically display our absolute connectedness to nature, I'm not necessarily trying to be too negative about it. And that's why I've always kept away from the idea of any sort of iconography of any specific state or anything like that in the paintings. Like in these flags here, for example, I always make sure to sort of have them as just these stand-ins for the idea of a society that is present in the paintings, but not a specific one, because I want to avoid that sort of like overly politicized element to the paintings. I don't want them to sort of be an absolute propaganda to the work, but more sit from a slightly sort of more removed and slightly on a sort of more philosophical level. My interest is first and foremost in landscape, and painting is the way in which I sort of go about exploring that. And so I always left people out of the paintings, and over time it actually became this sort of this strength. I mean, if you were to add a person to one of these paintings, it would entirely change the language, whereas this kind of leaves it as a much more timeless, within constraints image. You know, is it a 17th, 18th century scene? Is it a contemporary scene? You know, I want that to be left open for debate, and it also invites the viewer in a bit more, I think. It leaves you as like the sole occupant. You sort of become the wanderer, sort of Caspar David Friedrich's wanderer in front of the painting, rather than having them in the painting themselves. I don't go in for a particularly specific or coherent narrative, and I think that's one of the things where avoiding painting figures means that you don't have that. When I paint, it's purely just the one image, and it's the painting as a symbol, exactly that, rather than having a narrative coherence that I want anyone to gain from. Like, I mean, you're more than welcome to. Like, I very much adhere to the idea that you can, the viewer can do what they want with the painting, but for me, it is that importance of the symbol of the work, rather than learning anything from a particular narrative you could transpose onto it.